Today I have with me Darcy Pach, K4DQP. Darcy is heavily involved with the YCARS group in South Carolina, but he's also a big Parks on the Air POTA fan. And one of the things I love about Parks on the Air is that everybody seems to get into it for different reasons and have a different focus. And Darcy is one of those people that has a very unique focus. And I wanted to talk to him about that today, as well as YCARS and anything else that might come up. Darcy, thanks for joining me.
Hey, good afternoon, and thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Well, I appreciate you dealing with some of the technical difficulties we've had over the last 24 hours. It's just like ham radio, right?
That's right. That's right.
So tell me about Parks on the Air and your involvement with that program. How long's it been?
Yeah, so I got started doing Parks on the Air through a fellow amateur radio friend of mine, W3SPC, Steve Chikowski. And Steve was a big POTA guy. He'd go out and camp out in his camper, and he invited me along for a all weekend, all expenses paid trip to K4DQP State Park up in the mountains of South Carolina. And that was my first real, true POTA activation, if you will. I've been chasing parks a little bit here and there, and he was like, forget field day, forget winter field day. You've never had a pileup like this before, and you're going to have some fun. And so he promised me this great weekend, and I went with him and spent a couple days activating K4DQP State Park, and just had a blast. And it was a little different than what I've seen other Parks in the Air people do with regards to driving to a park and setting up on a picnic bench or just operating from your vehicle. I mean, he was like living at this campsite for, several days. And that just made the whole experience a lot different than what I was used to and seeing. And so that was my first real activation. And I was hooked from that point forward.
Well, I don't blame you. And that sounds like a blast, honestly. And as I said earlier, a lot of people seem to do this differently. There are people that hike into a particular park, and they'll set up and make their 10 QSOs and get their activation and move on. There are other people that will drive into a parking lot and get their 10. I happen to like to get my 100 or 200 QSOs when I'm there. But this idea that you go to a park, and I think that you now aim to get a kilo when you or close. You aim to get as many QSOs as possible when you go to a park. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair. We like to say we like to burn the park down, not really, but I mean, that's kind of the idea is like, hey, let's go out and put a ton of effort into it. We like to hang wire antennas, whether it's a loop or an off-center fed or something unique. Put some wire in the air, hang them high is what we like to joke around like, and just do some unique activations, whether it's at a unique location or really strive for some big numbers and just have a lot of fun, seeing how many we can get in 24 hours or 48 hours. It's a little different than what some people do, and it's just something that works for me and works for us.
So let's stick with the activation you did with Steve. So this was over a course of 2 to 3 days, correct?
Yes.
And were you operating from day to night?
Yeah, it's funny because he said to me, well, we're going to get you a kilo. And I was like, a what? And we're going to get 1,000 contacts? And he's like, oh, yeah, we're going to get that. You're going to get that. And, I guess Facebook blew up and they were like, hey, let's get this guy's kilo. And everybody was rooting for me. And it was just a pile up. It was exhausting, 6-7 hours of straight operating. And Steve's like, you're not leaving that radio. He was cooking for me. I'd get up and walk away from the radio, and the next operator said, hey, where's Darcy? I don't want to talk to Steve. I want to talk to Darcy, help him get his kilo.
So when I go to a park, I typically operate on 20, maybe 40, maybe both, but that's the extent of it. But I'm presuming that if you're there for as long as you were, you're operating on many bands.
Oh, yeah. We'll try many bands. We'll try 17, kind of middle of the day, middle of the afternoon is really good. We'll do 80 at night. We'll do 40 and 20. I mean, just whatever's open. We like to give people that park on as many bands as possible and give as many people the opportunity to get that park as we can. That's just kind of what we do. And it's good practice, for us. If we're doing a POTA activation, those skills, those speed skills, or those operating a big pileup helps in a contest. So if you're looking to work a contest, a photo activation is a great way to warm up for that. And then every activation is a little different. It can be more of a contest type environment where you're really burning through the numbers, or it's more casual and it's interacting with the operator on the other side. But it just kind of depends on who's calling you, and how the bands are. But yeah, we try to operate on multiple bands, not just one.
So I'm always curious what people are using for gear. What did you and Steve take for this particular activation?
Yeah, so I think we ended up using an FTDX 10. That's kind of the radio choice that we like. Maybe it was a 7300, I don't recall, but it's something like that, 7300 or FTDX 10.
And antennas?
And antennas, it's typically wire antennas. We'll get a campsite or even two campsites, and that way we can spread out a little bit. We might put a loop up or an off-center fed, and usually, it draws a little curiosity, like, hey, what are you doing here? What are you hanging these wires? The ranger might come by and ask what you're doing, and it's always pays to be polite and be an ambassador for ham radio. And then sometimes the neighbors will come by and be like, oh yeah, my grandfather did that, or my dad did that, and yeah, you can hang it up in the trees right over my camper, it's okay. And so it's always sort of like fun to interact with other people and see what you can use. You got to be flexible though. Sometimes one time we went to a park and Steve got an antenna stuck in a tree. We ended up using we ended up throwing up an offset end fed, and it was like, what are we going to ground this to? And we ended up grounding it to the campsite water supply system. And that was kind of a big joke, but the iron pipes went all throughout the whole campsite. We had this incredible ground system for our antenna. So typically it's going to be wire antennas is what we use.
And I understand that after this activation, you wrote a piece for your club newsletter.
Yeah, I wrote this article. It was partially in response to, you'll hear the comment a lot, oh, the bands are dead. Well, I don't hear that as much anymore now that the solar cycle's kind of improved. But you'd hear people say the bands are dead, the bands are dead. And I wrote this article called The Bands Are Dead, I Beg to Differ. And it was really more about rethinking the way that you operate, whether it's on a different band, a different antenna, a little bit different time of day you're operating, maybe a different mode even. And it was really kind of designed to challenge the people in the club who and other people, but challenge people in the club who go out and it may not be as successful as they want to be. It was kind of like, hey, just stop, rethink what you're doing. Maybe there's a better way to do it. And it was kind of encouraging to people. And I kind of touched on the whole idea of ambassadorship. When you're out in the field, when you go out to a park, you're an ambassador not only for amateur radio, for Parks on the Air, but for yourself as well. And so being courteous, having respect for people's property, and being inviting to people, to me, is all part of doing an activation, a successful activation.
And it always strikes me that the bands are not in fact dead when you get on a contest, because when you're contesting, it seems as though they're pretty alive, and certainly propagation and conditions can dictate how long a band might be open, how active it might be, how far you can get. But I'm always impressed that as soon as the contest starts at 0 Zulu, it's pretty active all over the place. So I totally agree. I think that you can't make that decision before you turn the radio on and try a few bands and even wait half an hour because something may shift within a half an hour.
Yeah, and even the inflection in your voice may draw somebody in. If you sound real kind of dull and you're calling CQ. I mean, who wants to, I think I don't want to talk to that guy. He's not very, he doesn't sound like somebody I want to talk to. But if you hear somebody calling,
I was talking to Marty Soloway the other day, and N1C, he's a big contester. And one of the pieces of advice he gives to people that are getting into contesting is act loud. Whether you are or not, act loud. And I thought that was really
Yeah.
great. If you go in with that sort of confidence and aren't meek, then we're all better off. And I find the same way. I've actually had to stop yelling at times because someone will say, "I think you're overmodulating a bit," and it's because I'm yelling into my mic. But
Yeah, and the same thing goes for, like, when you do an activation and you're at like some historical site or something, people kind of interested, like, hey, what are you doing there? What went on there? I'm always I always listen for that when I'm hunting parks. I hear somebody at some really cool old battlefield or fort or some historic site. And I'm like, every now and again you hear them mention, like, oh, this was the home of so and so, or this battle took place back in such and such a day, and this was the turning point of this war. But something interesting, I think that sort of just captures people's. It's not just another contact. It's like, hey, I was sort of mentally there with that person on that battlefield, and I think kind of doing a little background research on where you're going to activate is important as well.
yeah, and I think even as you just said, even for us as the activators, I've seen more of Maine ever since I started doing Parks on the Air than I did in the past decades of living here. And it's fun to go to these parks and learn a little bit about them, understand what the topography is. If it's a historical site, understand what that is. It is a fun aspect of it. If you're not moving too quickly, I've been doing some roves where I need to move on quickly, so there's not a lot of time. And I think that's something that you're also have been involved with in the past, correct? Doing some roves.
Yeah, well, I did one rove. I officially did one rove, and the rove I recently did was in October of this year, and it was a 10 park rove in one day. So initially, I was going for the what was called formerly the Lion Award, which was, I think it was 12 parks in one day or 15 parks in one day, and then Parks in the Air kind of changed the program a little bit. And so I knew I could only get so many parks. But yes, I recently did a rove out to the Outer Banks from Charlotte, North Carolina, or from my home in Rock Hill here, uh, out to the Outer Banks, which is about 450 miles, call it. And I did that rove on the way out there, on the way out for a week-long fishing trip, and had a blast doing the rove out to those 10 parks.
Darcy, what's your ham radio background? When were you first licensed?
Believe it or not, I had to look it up. I think it was 2013. I got my first call sign. I'm a general class, and I got started in amateur radio. Everybody kind of has a story or some kind of like reason why they got into it. I honestly cannot tell you why I got into amateur radio. I just did, and it seemed like a little challenge. And then I have a son who's also, he got his amateur radio license when he was 12 along with me, and he did an activation with me earlier this year out in Florida. And so for me, it's just um, something kind of natural, something kind of technical. But there's no real reason I got into it other than I just got into it. It seemed cool, and don't have any family members, any other family members that were previous amateur radio operators. My brother's an amateur radio operator. He got his ticket. But I don't think those guys really get on the air. Yeah, not
So,
with me.
so I'm curious, how were you aware of amateur radio? Was it through your brother-in-law then? How were you aware that it was even a possibility?
I think I saw it in a movie or something. I mean, I've read about it maybe in Wired magazine or something. I mean, it wasn't really something that I had any exposure to, which is kind of interesting how people come to this hobby. But I didn't. I don't recall ever having met anybody or spent any time, and I researched and found the club that I'm currently active in, and decided to come to a meeting and check it out. It seemed pretty cool, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to get my license, and studied for it and got that, and the rest is kind of history. You know.
So what do you say to the people, and I'm sure you have these people that come up to you at a park and ask you about ham radio and invariably ask, why is it relevant in today's world of cell phones and advanced technology? What do you say?
Yeah, yeah. So I will tell you that I've had some great experiences out in the field with people. Um, I'll tell you two stories. First off, we went to Great Smoky Mountains National Park, which is a beautiful park, the most visited national park in the country. I think it gets over 2 million visitors a year, in Tennessee, and I guess I'm not sure. It's not in Carolina. It's in Tennessee. We were up there operating, and Steve was doing CW, Morse code, and a lady walked up, and she just stopped and she stared. And I went up to her and I said, "Hey, how you doing?" She said, "Oh," she said, "just listening." She said, "Is that Morse code?" And we said, "Yeah." She said, "I love that sound. It's like music." And I said, "Oh," and it turns out she was a COVID nurse, and she came up to the mountains to get away from it all. I call it the peak of COVID, whatever it was. And it was just kind of like this moment where she just saw it as something just really relaxing and just really interesting. And for her, I'd say ham radio was just something her grandfather did, and she hadn't really experienced it since, but it kind of brought back memories for her. Another guy that we were at a park with just recently, we were doing the Support Your Parks weekend in July, and the guy was a NASA engineer, and we were hanging the dipole, an off-center fed dipole up, and he said, "I know exactly what that is." He said, "Are you guys doing some kind of communications test?" And we said, "Well, we're going to run a contest." He goes, "I was a radio man on a bomber in World War II." And he knew exactly what we were doing, and he came over and spent time and hung out with us and checked out the new radios. He's like, "Wow, these radios aren't like what I used to use." He had so much fun. And he's like, he said to us, "I didn't think anybody still did this today." And I think there's kind of this misconception of what ham radio is today versus what it was at one time. And absolutely agree that there's a emergency aspect to it. I think there's a bigger following of people who are just interested in communicating and getting away from just the texting and the phone. And this is just another aspect, another way to communicate. It's another way to challenge themselves. It's kind of a single solitary thing to do. It's not like you're on a team. I mean, you are when you contest or whatever, but it's very self-satisfying. And I think a lot of people are drawn to it that way. Technically, if you said, what is it? Well, it's an emergency service. It's a hobby. It's an experimental avenue to develop technology and new things. But I think it's really whatever somebody wants to make it, for the most part. I mean, you're involved in it. A lot of people are involved in it for different reasons. I'm involved with it. I get a lot of satisfaction out of just tinkering and figuring stuff out, the science, the fellowship with other operators in the club, things like that. Will I ever design and build my own radio? Probably not. I mean, I'm terrible at soldering. I'm working on that. I don't understand circuits and everything and all this other stuff that some people do, but I understand computer code and how that works and how it interfaces with the radio and does other things. So for me, it's amateur radio is just a wonderful avenue to experiment with and to develop relationships with people potentially all over the world. And there's a lot of science to it. And I think that's very intriguing for somebody with my personality.
Well, I think it's not unlike what I was saying about Parks on the Air, where you can go off in a number of different directions. But ham radio is just that. And sometimes I find it challenging to explain to people what ham radio is about because there are so many different facets. My dad's case, he was licensed back in 1977. I don't think he operated much at all, but he built the Heathkit HW101 that we used. He built a linear amplifier from Heathkit. He built a bunch of other things. I think he enjoyed putting the tower up and the antenna up and supporting my effort to operate, but that's what he got out of it. Just yesterday, I visited a remote station here in Maine, in rural Maine, owned by W1IMD, and he does very little operating, but you could just see the pride that he takes in this station that not only did he build, but he as with most things with ham radio, you continue to rebuild it and add to it and update it. So I think it's always a challenge. I do enjoy those conversations when I'm at parks, when people come up and ask me what's going on, but because they're always coming at it from a little bit different angle. It's certainly fun when somebody was a ham once before, or their neighbor was, and they think they recognize what I'm doing, and as soon as I say, it's like I knew it, and they're in for a while. Tell me about your son. You said he was 12 when he licensed.
Yeah, he did. He was kind of interested. He's kind of a techie, and he decided he wanted to get on the radio, and he studied, and he actually got his general license. And so he's been out to a couple activations with us. He comes up for field day and visits and things like that. Not a big contest or anything, and he kind of does his own stuff now. He's in college, and so. Yeah, I've always encouraged him to do if he wants to get more involved and do other things, he can. I don't try to push him into it or anything like that, but he's always taken an interest in all the things that I do. He's always asking me about things and very supportive as well. I want to go back to something you said about when people ask you. I've had several interactions with rangers at the parks, and that's always interesting, because parks are. I take some of the parks, national parks especially, are kind of, I won't say sacred, maybe not the right word, but they're special places. Certain things are very special, battlefields, memorials, things like that, and national parks typically encompass those. And I've had several interactions with rangers, specifically at Cape Hatteras Lighthouse. The ranger there at Cape Hatteras National Seashore is just an awesome guy. And he's like, "Oh yeah, ham radio. Yeah, I know what you guys do. You can come here and operate anywhere you want to operate." In fact, he sent me a satellite picture and circled a couple spots right at the lighthouse and said, "Here, you can operate here or here, or if you don't want people around you can operate here." And so part of it's kind of building the relationship a little bit before you even go, and telling what you're going to do. But we've had several rangers come by and knock the door and, "Hey, what are you guys doing?" And I think Steve even had a ranger in his camper working the radio with him one time. And I thought, how cool is that? It's like being an ambassador, and they said, "Oh gosh, my radios don't even get across the park, and you're talking to somebody around the world." So a part of it is kind of the mystery and the science that gets people excited. I get excited just thinking about it.
Well, I know there's a lot of different opinions when it comes to asking for permission, but I happen to be in the camp. If I see a ranger, I would rather talk to him. I'm not sure that I'm asking for permission, but I do talk to him, tell him what I'm going to do, and invariably, you're right. They've seen somebody before me. There are those parks that I go to that have never been activated before, but typically in those cases, there's not even a ranger around. The really popular parks, usually there's been a ham there before, and I agree that the conversations tend to be pretty positive and supportive. The very first park that I activated was a lighthouse. I was curious all the way there. It was a 4-hour drive. And don't ask me why I drove 4 hours for my very first activation. That's another story. But I was trying to figure out where I would actually set up, and there was a ranger there, and he said, "Right there." It was 30 feet from the lighthouse. It was a perfect spot. Pouring rain, and I think he felt bad for me, but it certainly added to my story and added to the fun of the activation. I barely made my 11. Just one more than I needed. It was painful.
Oh, yeah.
Things have changed.
You always should get that insurance contacts. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is like choosing a spot where to operate is important. But as far as getting the permission, county parks, state parks, I think about a little differently. But national parks, yeah. I don't want to get in any trouble, but lighthouses, yeah, all these places are really cool places to operate. And that's kind of my thing is when I go to a park, I try to learn a little bit about it, but decide whether I want to notify or not notify or ask permission or whatever. sometimes you'd be surprised on what asking permission can do. You could probably get a little bit of operating spot or some special tour or something.
Well, interestingly enough, I typically have a problem with my dogs that I bring with me more so than I have with the antenna that I want to set up. There's usually more restrictions on where the dogs can be than where I can put my vertical. Darcy, I also wanted to ask you about your involvement with YCARS. You're the third person I've talked to from that club, and every time I meet somebody from YCARS, I can feel the energy that comes from that club. I mean, it seems to be something magic that you guys have created there at the York County Amateur Radio Society. Tell me about that. How long have you been involved, and what's that experience been like for you?
Yeah, it's a special place, and I have to say that it's not just one person. It is a team. It is every member of the club that has poured their heart and soul into it. I think you talked to two of our previous members. When I came to the club back in 2013, like I said, I don't think I was AM radio operator at the time. I just wanted to check it out, see if it was something I wanted to get into. I visited this club and I thought, oh, this is kind of cool. And it said these guys got these radios and this and that. And 2 years later, I was the president of the club. I felt like I was the guy who had the most energy in the club. I wanted to do stuff. We had about 35 members at the time when I joined back in 2013 or so. Today, it's 130 members. And we were just looking at some numbers today. We decided, I became the president. John and K4DQP was my vice president. We decided to turn the club around. The two of us and a couple other people said, you know what, let's make this into something that's just amazing. And we did. And one of the secrets was just to get active, get out there and do stuff. But I have a technical background. I do data analytics. So I'm always about the numbers and about budgets and forecasts and so forth. And so we redid the club budget. We redid the club constitution. We really made it a club that was going to dedicate resources and time and effort into membership and what the members wanted to do. We knew people wanted to get active, wanted to get out, wanted to build stuff and do stuff, and they weren't doing it. And we just pushed for it, and we pushed for it, and we said, we're going to do this. And we just said, hey, let's have an antenna building party. Well, when 10, 15 people, half the club shows up for that, it's just awesome. So we started that way. And my philosophy as the president was always to be a good steward of what we've been entrusted with by the people that came previous, that built this amazing club, started in 1948, built a clubhouse. They put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears and money into it. And we wanted to continue that. We wanted to continue that legacy and build it for my kids for the future. And we made a very clear decision that we were going to do that. And it started with just getting active, just getting out there and saying, hey, if it's just the two of us going to activate a park, or two of us going to go operate for field day or let's say field day, winter field day or whatever, it's just the two of us. And it turned out it wasn't. It turned out it was like half the club shows up, because they all want to go out and do it. And then it became more and more. And then we got more people involved, and we sort of allocated and assigned people certain tasks and everything. Since that time, I've taken on the treasury role. And the treasury role is very important because I'm the guy who says yes or no to spending money. And I'm always thinking about, is this something that if I send out $1, what's it bringing back to me? Is it bringing back some value? So the idea is not just values and membership, but is it doing something for the community? Is it doing something for our members? Is it doing something to grow the club in a very positive way? Is this a good resource? Is this a good allocation of our resources? And I take that responsibility very seriously. And I think that all the officers do in the club, certainly, and other members do. And it has paid off in such high dividends. We got recognized in the QST magazine. They did an article on us. We've had another write-up, some of our STEM activities that we do. and we really want to. We always think about being the club that we want to be, not the club that we are. I think that's an important sort of way of thinking about, like, what do you want your club to be? It can't be everything. And so for the focus for this year, we have a new president this year, our first female president, which is exciting. It's incredible. Since 1948, it's been a bunch of guys. And so we have our first female president this year in 2023. And, the encouragement that I gave her was, hey, focus on the membership, focus on what our people want to do and what they're doing and what they're interested in. And this club will continue to grow organically and positively. So YCARS is a very special place, and we encourage people to talk to us if they want to grow. If they want to see how we've done it. We've had many people reach out to us and ask us how we did it. Can we get a copy of your bylaws? We're in the same situation you were 3 years ago. How do we grow? What do we do? And we've helped people do that. And you're right. It is on. I feel like my fire has dampened somewhat because I've got all these new members who've come in on fire, and so. But you're right. It is. It's a great place.
So I presume it's less about the monthly meetings and more about the activity outside of the meetings. Is that what you're telling me?
I'd say, our focus has changed. When I started in the club, you had a business meeting and a presentation meeting, 2 meetings a week. And then you had some kind of activity like maybe a field day or, a QSO party or something like that, And we decided we were gonna. Now we have the benefit and are fortunate enough to have a clubhouse. We actually have a physical clubhouse. Not every club has that, and we realize that that's an incredible thing to have. But we try to take full advantage of that. Give people a place to come and learn how to solder, and it's not in their own house. It's not at their kitchen table. They have a whole workshop they can come learn how to solder at. And they got people that are willing to teach them. So for us, it's a lot less about the meetings. We took everything online. Even just prior to COVID, we'd taken everything online. Just happened that COVID hit. But now we have more people that come for this sort of casual, non-program meetings, no agenda kind of meetups and things at the clubhouse than we do at our regular scheduled meetings. And that's perfect. That's great. We love it. So I think for us, the attendance and the interest has grown not to be about the business meeting. I mean, who wants to sit around and listen to, the bank balance? And I mean, yes, those things have to be done, but that's not exciting to a new person who comes to
I've been there before where the minutes get read, the treasury report, and then it's time to go. You've had your coffee and you leave, and that's not as exciting.
You go out in an email, just do something with that time,
Well, congratulations to you, Darcy, and the whole YCARS group, because I keep hearing fantastic things about it. I wish you guys were closer. I'd come to a meeting or one of your activations, but who knows? Maybe the next time I'm traveling through, I'll stop at the clubhouse.
We'd love that. We'd love that.
Darcy, thank you for being with me today. I've been talking to Darcy Pach, K4DQP. He's in South Carolina. You'll find him either at a YCARS meeting or activation, or look for him on the POTA spotting page. Thank you, Darcy.
Thank you very much.